Thank you, Maureen. I think Security Hack, you're giving me a lot of credit, so I appreciate that. So to frame my discussion today, I'd like to start with a little story that took place probably about a year ago. So we're Reliant, we're a software platform for hospitality, fine dining, retail, and C-store merchants, okay? And I'm a merchant advocate. I speak for the operations teams of my customers. I am our internal advocate, I would say. So as part of many of our customers onboarding our solution, we usually roll in what's called an environment characterization. And an environment characterization is an exercise which maps the PCI DSS, which is the payment card industry data security standard, right? Which every card accepting business in this room today is required to adhere to based on their card issuer agreements with the major card brands and their acquirers. So we do an exercise where we basically look at applications, systems, servers, policies, procedures. We look at infrastructure. We look at how the business runs, how efficient and how well are they mapped to the PCI DSS. The PCI DSS is a very prescriptive formula for managing security. Now, there's a separate discussion about how effective PCI DSS has been in recent years with all the recent breaches and Target, and we can talk about that. But what PCI DSS does, it frames the discussion for security, and it provides guidance and specific technical objectives around what needs to be accomplished. So we were at a West Coast merchant, about 150 restaurants, and we had gone through day one. We had met the new CFO and the new incumbent team, the new group of IT people there. Gone through the network infrastructure, got lots of positive feedback about how things were completely different. There's no possible way that the old team's mistakes are going to be, a recipe for the future. And we said, okay, day two tomorrow is where we're really going to test the waters and see how this thing runs. So we came along, and that evening we went to one of the restaurants of this merchant, and we're sitting there, and they had explicitly told us that there was no Wi-Fi access. They had shut down their guest Wi-Fi because they had recognized there was a segmentation issue in their environment. So I'm sitting there, and I'm sitting at the bar, and I guess I could have started this by saying, an IT guy walks into a bar, but I didn't do that. So I'm sitting there, and I noticed there's a wireless printer on the side, and there's a yellow sticky behind the wall, and there's an IP address sitting on the printer. And I just asked the bartender, I said, where's the cabling? How are you printing off this thing? That's off our special network. Our special network. So, so the colleague that I was traveling with, way more talented than me in terms of security and in terms of an analysis of security protocols and infiltrating environments, we basically got into the environment. And we got in by using default credentials, right? It's the sad story that we hear over and over again. So from there, we were able to basically hop into the back office PC. So the back office manager PC. And from there, we basically see, we just hit the Wild West. We are now able to see everything. I'm able to see payroll information. I'm able to get on the corporate network. I'm able to see menus. I'm able to see social security numbers. And then I find archived backups of in-store back-of-house systems. So I've got payment card data, I've got customer information, I've just got it all. So we left it as it is. The next day we reported to the CFO. We said, this is the environment you have, right? So through one technical objective that was failed, we were able to basically hop into the environment and do this. And this is par for the course from our perspective. So this kind of frames some of the things I want to talk about today. So the discussion today has been so many great points today. The transformation is underway. What we're seeing is the way that infrastructure today is being delivered to the guest, me as a consumer, my expectations and your guests' expectations and your CEO's expectations are that things should be delivered quickly. They should be delivered one time and correctly. And what we're seeing is that the days of the past are no more, right? So we're no longer a one vendor vessel. We're no longer steering one vendor and taking all the products from one vendor. As Guy Rigby mentioned before on his panel discussion, he had a legitimate business requirement, and that requirement was not able to be met. So he found an agile new entrant into this field that was able to come in and meet that business requirement. And that's what we're seeing. That's what all of my hospitality customers are seeing. They are no longer going to one vendor. They are looking at options. And the operations teams are driving IT to say, how do I test? I want to test drive this new reservation app. I want to test drive engagement. I want to test drive all of these new things, and how do I do it? Do I have the infrastructure? Do I have the actual infrastructure today with enough headroom and enough capability to onboard these new technologies? And what we tend to find is not really, right? The capital investment's not there. The intersection between governance and the alignment between operations objectives and IT's budgets are maybe not there also. And what we see is something like this, right? So, doesn't look that bad, but what we see is kind of a mishmash. We see multiple vendors. We see individual discrete systems, single tool sets to make configuration changes. None of it's centrally managed, right? This is all, if I'm making a change to a firewall, I'm connecting to one device. If I'm an IT person in a hospitality company, I'm changing one portal, I'm going in through one application. If I'm making a modification to a firewall or an access point, I may have a different wireless provider than my internal router. I may have 4G backup that's on a different set of configurations. And this is what we see. We see a dilemma from an IT perspective. So what is causing, what is all the stuff that we're talking about? And this is the reality check. This deck should have been called reality check, not security hack, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about fixed position point of sale and back of house systems. POS systems that have a lifespan of anywhere from 5 to 7 to 9 years, depending on what you've got. We've got tableside service. We've got iPads, digital content delivery. We've got a combination of forthcoming payment acceptance at table, maybe not. We'll talk about that in a minute. NFC payments. We've got customer-facing devices for fast casual, fine casual. We've got the NFC entrance into the field in terms of Apple Pay, Android Pay. We've got the soon-to-be-released Samsung Pay, which we'll see how that does. Open Pay's up there too, and Stripe. And then we've got the operating systems. We've got network infrastructure. We've got access points. We've got 4G backup. We've got DVR. We've got IP-based cameras, time clocks, environmental monitoring, and beacons. This is just a piece of it. Then there's applications, there's custom APIs, and what we see in hospitality is the budgets and the IT teams are not really kind of aligned with the objectives. And often the teams are trying to manage all of this stuff and put it into kind of a coherent strategic roadmap, and that's the challenge. So with a truly connected guest, right, with different kind of adoption rates of technology, so there's some challenges here. So in the room today, I don't know how many operators we have versus vendors here, but whose IT spend has gone down in the last 12, 18 months? Anybody? Nobody? Whose projects have gone up exponentially in terms of wanting to onboard new technology? Okay, so that kind of tells us where we are. So the goal here is, how do we align budgets? How do we align the next step strategically to move this all forward? Because the operations teams in hospitality are driving the IT business. And in terms of the roadmap, in terms of the strength of the operations team and how fast they want to move these projects forward, there's challenges because there is no proactive monitoring. There is no central configuration management. These applications are siloed. And that's what I think we've been hearing today, is that a lot of the POS vendors, the back of house vendors, have not really innovated. And what's popped up, what's kind of come out of this, is a whole new set of vendors that are more than willing to meet with the business and understand the guest experience and extend configurations and customize the behavior and extend that behavior to meet those objectives. And that's what we're seeing today. So with all of these competing objectives, there's a lot of things coming. The biggest thing that's coming, and you can debate whether this is an impactful thing for hospitality or not, but EMV is coming. It's merely 20 days away, okay? So EMV, there's a lot of noise about EMV. We spend a lot of time as a company. We're in the midst of a lot of EMV projects with retail companies. As it relates to hospitality, I think it's important to just kind of debunk a few of the things that are out there. This is certainly not a mandate. This is a choice. And I think I've talked to operators today and last night that are evaluating, is this something that I need to look at? Do I need to evaluate where my risk is? So I think there's some questions that need to be answered. I think to do a proper analysis around EMV, you need to know what your chargeback liability really is. You need to know what your fraudulent card rate is. You need to know what your card present transaction rate is. You need to know what your card present rate is, right? It's very hard actually to get the actual liability, the chargeback liability that's currently being absorbed by Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, and JCB today as a merchant. When you go to your acquirer, you go to your Bank of America, or your Vantif, your Chase Payment Tech, it's actually quite hard to get to that actual number. You can look at your actual fraudulent card rate, but a lot of those transactions today are being absorbed because of this is the shift for EMV. So, should you elect to do an EMV project? There's several things that need to be kind of considered. One of them is I think you definitely need to speak to your acquirers. I think a discussion needs to be had about what the overall strategy for payment is. Is there value in me being a hospitality merchant in owning the token that I get back from a card present or card not present transaction and being able to leverage that for my own internal application? Do I want to be able to extend that token for mobile applications and other online functions and other guest service functions and CRM analytics? That's a big piece of the puzzle. And I think when it comes to EMV and when we start talking about payment technology, obviously I think that point-to-point encryption and I think that tokenization have a far greater benefit out of the gate for hospitality merchants. The biggest risk we see across the board with every one of our merchants when we first meet them is the amount of data that is stored, that is unencrypted, card data. And it's just everywhere. We see it in hospitality. Hospitality is a siloed, fragmented application environment from what we see when we look at our customer base. So EMV is it's coming up. It's 20 days away from today. It's impactful to consumer goods business, impactful to retail. I think from a hospitality standpoint, our position is that this is something that you guys need to evaluate. You need to think about it because this is where everything's heading, right? 15 years ago in Canada, there wasn't pay at table, but now everything's pay at table. There's issues with pay at table in terms of how you apply the tip, how the cryptogram, which is generated upon successfully processing the transaction, includes that total amount, including tip. There's a lot of gotchas in this equation. So I would implore you to speak to your acquirers. If you're going to make this investment and you're going to look to do something with EMV, minimally make it an operational win so that you can accept Apple Pay, you can take Samsung Pay, you can take Android Pay, because at the net of this is you're going to have to install some hardware into your locations for today. And it must comply with the PCI DSS. So, back to where I started is, where the ROI is in PCI. There's a concept when we do an audit called defense in depth. And my first kind of example where we were able to kind of skip through one control and kind of own the environment, that's an example where defense in depth wasn't working, right? So if you think of it in terms of how technical controls are deployed and how security may not be a feature today that you really bake into every vendor and every application that you bring in, security needs to be at the forefront of everything you do, not just from a card data, from an EMV and from a PCI perspective, but to secure the environment. Just because I may want to disrupt your environment. I may want to just be able to delete a server. I shouldn't have unauthorized access into the environment. These are technical controls that are very prescriptive. PCI doesn't tell you the vendors to use, but it tells you the objectives that you need to meet. And I think it's important, and the PCI DSS is something that, it creates a framework for how merchants can onboard new technology. So when we look at, the way things are moving forward, we look at, the agile restaurant. That's a concept we constantly kind of use around our office is, do our customers, when we first meet them, do they have the infrastructure? Do they have the ability to deploy new web services applications from all of these new vendors? Can they onboard the latest and greatest point of sale system? And what's the impact to that environment? Can they quickly adapt and provide new services as the operations team is pushing those things? So as you aggregate all of these different functions inside of a restaurant, I may need, resiliency. I need failover capability. I don't want to jeopardize that guest experience. I only have one chance to make that first impression, right? So all of the things that I need reliability of servers, networking, system, right? So all of these things need to be encompassed within the thought going forward. So that's my presentation. Thank you.